Let us learn about array. So before we actually learn about array, let me tell you why we need array. So for the same, I want to give you this example. We're going to learn about array. So before we learn about array, we should understand why we need arrays. So I'm going to create a variable, string, and then I'm going to create a variable name as name, and then I'm going to assign a value. Okay. Second time, I'm just going to use the same variable name. I'm going to have a different name. Third time, I'm going to use the same variable name. I've assigned the same variable name with a different value. If I had to print that variable name, what would be the result? What would be the output of this program? Philip, isn't it so? What does that mean? This variable name can store only one value. In this case, isn't it so? This variable name can store only one value. Even though I'm trying to store the similar type of data, when I say similar type of data, even though all these data belongs to a string data type, but still this variable can store only one value. What if I want to store more than one value on this particular variable name called name? For the same reasons, we use array. So array is a data structure. Array is a variable where we can able to store more than one data. But the condition is all the data has to be similar. When I say all the data has to be similar, if you wanted to store, so in this case, all the data that I have them here are string data type. So they are similar data types, isn't it so? So if I wanted to store all these data into one variable, I can able to store it. So what is array? Array is a variable that used to store a similar type of data. So in that case, instead of me creating a one variable to store these three values, I can use an array. Array is simply a variable that is used to store the similar data. So in this case, the syntax for you to use an array is, what is the syntax? Data type, name of the array name, and then the square bracket. So this is a syntax for you to use an array. First one is a data type, followed by name of the array, then this square bracket. So this square bracket, we are going to specify the size of an array. Here we are going to specify the size of an array. So in this case, for this same example, I'm going to modify using an array. So according to the syntax, the first one is a data type. So the data type is string, name of an array. So the name of an array is simply the name of the variable. So let me say the variable name as names, square bracket. So here I'm going to specify the size. So let's say, for example, I wanted to store all these three names. So I wanted to store three names. So I'm going to specify the size as 3. Now I need to assign the values for this particular variable name called names. Since I said the size is 3, so the maximum amount of data that I can store into this particular array will be 3. If I wanted to store more than 3, what will happen? The size of an array is 3. So what does that mean? I can store only maximum of 3. It's not necessarily 3, maximum is 3. Even if you want to store only one data, you can still store it. Isn't it so? So let's say, since I specify the size as 3, so I can store the maximum of 3 values. So if you wanted to store, you're going to use the pair of calibraces like this, and then you're going to specify the values. Like this. So what does that mean? This variable names now has 3 values. One is Ranjan, another one is Alex, another one is Philip. Previously, if you use this method, this variable name can store only one value. But this time, just because it's an array, you can able to store 3 data. It's not necessarily 3. Even if you wanted to store 100 data, you can still store them. Just that you have to specify the array size as 100. So now, I'm sure that you know array elements are stored in a memory, and then array uses something called index. So what does that mean? So here there is a variable name called names, and then let's consider this is like an array. This is where we are going to store our data. So since I have stored 3 informations here, the first one is Ranjan, so it will be stored here. The second name is Alex, it will be stored here. Third one is Philip, it will be stored here. Let's say the size of an array is 5. So what does that mean? The maximum data that I can store in this variable is 5. It's not necessarily I have to store 5 data. I can still store 3 data because the size is 5. Are we together? Are we together? So in that case, let's say I'm just storing only 3 elements in this particular array. Though the size is 5, as you can see them here, those are size is 5, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the elements that I'm storing them here are only 3. They are only 3. So what is going to happen for the remaining 2? If you don't assign any values to these 2 blocks here, by default, when you use a data type name as a string or character, by default, these places will be assigned with a value now. This now is for the string data type as well as for the character data type. In case, let's say the data type is an integer, and then you wanted to store some integer number. So let's say integer number, and then the size is 5. But in the array, you're just storing 1, 2, 3. And then the next 2, you're not storing anything. So in that case, by default, the value will be 0 for integer, float, and double. If you don't assign a value to these 2 fields, by default, the value will be 0. When you use the data type as string or character, if you don't assign any value to these 2 fields, by default, the value will be null. In that case, when you run, you're not going to get any output. It will be like a blank screen. But when the data type is integer, float, or double, when you try to have an access to this data, actually you're going to get a result as a 0. Now I said array works based on an index. So array index starts from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. So if you wanted to store 5 elements in an array, the first element will be stored into the 0th index, and the last element will be stored into the size of n minus 1. Let's say, for example, the size is 5. So the last element will be stored into the 4th index of an array. What is the size of an array? N minus 1, isn't it so? What does that mean, n minus 1? If you wanted to store 5 data or 5 elements, the last element will be stored into the index of n minus 1, size of n minus 1, isn't it so? So let's say the size of this array is 5, but the last element is stored into the fourth index. Because the size is 5, the last element will be stored into the n minus 1, which is 4 here, just because the array indexes starts from 0. So what is array? Array is a variable that used to store the similar type of data. If you don't assign any value for the array size, when the data type is string and character, it's going to print the result as now. Not necessarily it's going to give you the output as now, you will just see the blank screen. But if you have an integer or float or data like a double data type, when you don't have any values in the assigned memory, actually you're going to get the result as 0. So let me show you this example to understand. So now the size is 3, isn't it so? Now let's say I have only one data. The array size is 3. So what does that mean? I can store up to 3 data for this variable name called names, but I have stored only one data. So if you wanted to print that name, what do you do? So you just put cout. The name of the variable is names. The name of the variables is names. Since this is a variable that we are using them here, though it can store up to 3 data, but for now this variable has only one value, that is Ranjan. So if you wanted to print this value, as I said, array works based on an index. So the first value will always found in the 0th index. So the assumption is, if you wanted to print the first value, you are going to specify the square bracket and then you are going to put 0, which means that is where my first data will be stored. So when I put semicolon, it's just going to print me the result as, there is a semicolon missing here. When I save this one, when I run this one, it's going to give me the result as Ranjan. Though the size is 3, I have only one data. When I specify the size as 3, what does that mean? The computer will allocate the memory for this particular variable to store up to 3 data. So if the data type is string, how many bytes of memory will be allocated for the string data type? For the string data type, how many bytes of memory will be allocated by the operating system? Huh? It's not a gambling like 2, 1, 3. No. Are you sure? Cout size of string is 8. So what does that mean? For this particular variable name called names, the operating system will allocate 24 bytes of memory. Why? Because I said this variable names is going to store 3 data. In that case, for each data, 8 bytes of memory will be allocated. For the 3 data that I'm going to store them there, 3 times 8 is 24. 24 bytes of memory will be allocated, though you're just using just 8 bytes of memory just because you're just storing only one data. So what happened to the remaining 16? So just to see, in the first 8 bytes of memory, this value has been stored. So if you wanted to see what has happened to the remaining, so in that case, when the size is 3, the last element, what is the last array index? It's 2, isn't it so? Because the array index starts from 0. So the first element will be found in the 0th index, second one will be found in the first index, the last element will be found in the second index. So if you wanted to see what is in there in the second index, yes, I can see, because the size of an array is 3, so the last array index will be 2. If you wanted to see what is stored in the last index, it's just going to give us now. When I say now, it's not going to print now, instead it will be an empty. So if I run this one, that is empty here. So what does that mean? When you use string as a data type and when you don't use that memory, by default it will be a now. In case if you use the data type as integer, when I say integer, So let's say I'm going to pass just number 1. So in this case, even for this one, integer data type occupies 4 bytes of memory. So for these 12 bytes of memory will be allocated. Out of that 12 bytes of memory, we are just using the first 4 bytes of memory to store this number 1. What happened to the remaining 8? If you wanted to see what will happen to the last one, so just put 2. In this case, it's not going to be now. Instead, it will be 0. As you can see them here. So for the string and character, it will be now. For integer, float, and double, it will be 0 if you don't assign any value. But if you assign a value, let's say for example, the first one is 1, 2, 3. In this case, if I run this program, the result will be what? 3. Because on a second index, the value that I have stored them there is 3. So when I run this one, the result will be 3. Right? So now let us bring in the aspect of pointers here. This is a simple example. Let us bring in the aspect of pointers here. So what I want to do is, if I wanted to print the first element, I'm going to say 0. If I wanted to print the last element, I'm going to specify the array index. Let's say I wanted to change this number. This is a 0th index, this is a first index. Let's say I wanted to change the first index value. What do I need to do? If you wanted to change the values in this particular array, all you're going to do is you're going to pick the name of the array. The name of the array is names. So let's say I wanted to replace this value 2, specify the index. What's the index for this value? 1, isn't it so? Now I wanted to change them to 10. In that case, what is going to happen? This 10 will replace this 2. So if you wanted to see the values that has been stored into the first index now, it will be 10. I hope you know these things, right? I hope you know these things. So the next thing is, so let's say, so instead of names, let me just put numbers. So now let's say, for example, cout numbers. I'm not specifying any array indexes here. I just wanted to print the numbers variable. What would be the output? Here I have not specified any array indexes. If I specify the array index, yes, of course I'm going to have an access to it. Now I have not specified any array indexes. Instead, I just put the name of the variable here. What would be the output? It's going to print the address of the first element in this particular array. So when you run this one, it's going to print the address of the first element in this array. So how am I going to know this address is actually the address for the first element? If you wanted to see it, you can still see it. So you can just say cout. If you wanted to find out the address of the first element, what do you need to do? You have to use the ampersand and then get the name of the variable. If you wanted to specify, you wanted to get the address of the first one, how do you specify? Use the square bracket, pass the index. So the first one is 0. So let me just include end line. So when I save this one, when I run this one, as you can see them here, actually when you just pass the name of the variable, it returns the address of the first value in the array. Is it making sense? You know these things, right? So now let us bring in the aspect of pointers here. I'm going to say cout. Let me remove these two. The name of the variable is numbers plus 0. If I had to run this one, what would be the output? This one. In case if I try to run this one, what would be the output? Huh? Maybe an error. So when I run this one, oh, there is a semicolon missing. So when I run this one, I'm getting the address of the first element. There are different ways that we can use. It's not necessarily always square bracket. So now, if you wanted to see what has been stored into this particular memory address, what do you need to do? You have to use the asterisk, isn't it so? So this one returns the 0, means 0th index. So I'm going to return the address of the 0th index, and then I wanted to print the value that has been stored into the address. If you wanted to see the value, include the asterisk here. So when you run this one, the result will be what? 1. So if you wanted to print 3 here, now let's say you wanted to print this element 3 here, what do you need to do? The only thing that you're going to change them here is this number. This 0 is meant for the 0th index, first index, second index. If you wanted to print 3, here you're going to put what? 2. So this part here in the parenthesis is going to get the address of the second index. This asterisk here is going to pick the value that has been stored into the particular memory address, which is 3 here. So when you run this one, you will get the result as 3. So you can see them that the result is 3. Any questions? Do you understand this syntax now? I hope you know these things before, right? So this numbers is the name of the variable. When I put plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so this numbers here is actually specifying the array indexes. So when you don't put this asterisk here, it simply is going to return the memory address of this array index. So this is a variable, this specifies the array index. So when I say 2, this is the 0th index, first index, second index, is going to return the memory address for the value 3. If you wanted to print that value, what has been stored into that memory address? Remember I said we have to use asterisk. So here use asterisk. It will go and get the value that has been stored into the memory address. So as a result, we are going to print the result as 3. Any questions? Now, previously we have seen if you wanted to print these values, we can say numbers of 0, it will print 1. When I say numbers of 2, it will print 3. If I say numbers of 1, it is going to print the number 2. What if I wanted to print everything at once? We can use for loop, right? We can use loop. So how are we going to use for loop to print all the items from this particular array? So we can use for loop. Here I'm going to specify integer I is equals to 0. Why did I put I is equals to 0? Remember, the array indexes starts from 0. So the first element is always going to be stored into the 0th index. So I wanted to print everything. As a result, I wanted to start from the 0th index. That's the reason why I have to say I is equal to 0. Then I less than or maybe less than, I'm going to say 3. Why did I say I less than 3? The size is 3, but the array index starts from 0. So the size of an array is going to be n minus 1. In that case, it will be 2. So when it becomes 3, the condition has to fail, because we have the values starting from the 0th index, first index, and second index when the size is 3. I hope it's making sense, right? Yes. So that, let's say for example, you have 100 elements in the array. You can access all those 100 elements using the individual indexes, like numbers of 0 will print the first one, numbers of 1 will print the second one. So if you had to write the code like that, it's going to be huge, and then it will be a tedious task. So when you use for loop, actually to iterate through, even if you have 100,000 data here, the only thing that you are going to do them here is to write the condition to iterate through that for loop. So even if you have 100,000, here you are just going to say 100,000, so that it will be able to print all the data that has been stored into that array. So the next one is, I need to increment the I value. So inside I'm going to write C out. Now I have to print the values, isn't it? So the values here are 1, 2, 3. So these values 1, 2, 3 has been stored into the variable name called numbers. Actually, the numbers is a variable that has the values as 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to say numbers, but this numbers variable has got different values such as 1, 2, 3. Each values has been stored into a different array indexes. If you wanted to refer to that array indexes, that's the reason why I have used I is equals to 0 refers to the 0th index, I is equals to 1 refers to the first index, I is equals to 2 refers to the second index. So here if you wanted to print all the data, I have to put I here, so that when the I value becomes 0, it will go to the 0th index, then it will pick the value. When the I value becomes 1, it will be able to go to the first index, it will pick the first value. When the I value becomes 2, it will go to the second index, it will pick the third value. When the I value becomes 3, the condition will fail, it's not going to do anything. As a result, we were able to print all these values that has been stored into this array. So in this case, if I had to just include enter, we can able to print all the data that are there in the array. These are basics about arrays. I hope you know these things, right? Now I'm going to give you a task using an array. So you are going to create, are we together? You are going to create a program that stores the marks of 5 students. So you're going to create an array that stores the marks of 5 students. Then from that mark, you're going to find out the sum and average using an array. So you're going to create an array name called marks, where you're going to store 5 subject marks. So create an array name called marks. Then the size of the array is 5. So you're going to ask the user to enter the marks for all the 5 subjects. Mark for the first subject, second subject, third subject, fourth subject, and the fifth subject, because the array size is 5. Then after collecting the mark, you're going to add the mark, then you're going to find out the average. Is it making sense? So you're going to create an array name called marks. The size of an array is 5. So since the size of an array is 5, so you're going to ask the user to enter marks, maybe marks for any 5 subjects. So you're going to collect that marks, then you're going to add that marks, then you're going to get the average. How many minutes do you need? 2 minutes? Okay. So the task was to find out the average of a class. Maybe let's say the first thing is to create a variable, an array variable, where we are going to store the marks. So I'm going to say integer. I'm going to call this one as a marks. I said we are going to store 5 subject marks. Then we are going to add. Then we are going to calculate the average from there. So we need to calculate the average. I'm sure that according to the simple mathematics, for you to calculate an average, you need a sum. Isn't it so? So without sum, you're not able to calculate the average. So I'm going to create those variables, integer sum, and then I'm going to assign it to 0. If I don't assign it to 0, the sum variable will have some garbage value. I don't want it to have it. That's the reason why I'm assigning it to 0. Then I need to find out the average. So I'm going to create another variable name called average. Even if you wanted to assign this variable to 0, you can still do that. So what is next? I'm going to ask the user to enter the marks. So I'm going to enter cout. Please enter the marks. So after that, the user is going to enter the marks. So now he's not just going to enter one mark. Instead, he's going to enter 5 marks. So for the same reason, I'm going to use the for loop. I'm going to say integer I is equals to 0, I less than 5, because the size of an array is 5, then I plus plus. So inside, what I'm going to do, when the user enters the first mark, I wanted to store that mark into the 0th index. When he or she enters the second mark, that one will go and store into the second index, third index, and the fourth index, something like that. So here I'm just going to say, here this is a message that will be displayed to the user. Then this for loop is going to it's going to collect those marks, and then it's going to store those values into the 0th index, first index, second index, and third index. So for the same, I'm going to say cin, all those marks will be saved into the variable name called marks. So I'm going to say marks. In the square bracket, the first value will be stored into the 0th index, second value will be stored into the first index, second index, third index, so on and so forth. So for the same reason, I'm passing I, because this I varies, depends on this condition. Now here, what are we trying to do? We are collecting the mark, and then we are storing them into an array. Now our array has a value. What is next? We need to add that value. If you want to add that value, what you need to do, I'm going to say sum. That's a variable that I have created them here, equals sum plus marks of I. What does that mean? Initially the sum value was 0. I'm sure that you can able to see 0 plus, on the first iteration, when the I value is 0, 0 less than 5, the condition is true. When the condition is true, it will come here, and then it will store the first value into the 0th index. Let's say, for example, the user has entered the first mark as 10. So 10 plus 0 will be added, then that result will be stored into the variable name called sum. So now the sum value is 10. In the next iteration, let's say the user has entered the mark as 20. So in that case, the sum value was 10 before, plus the second mark was 20. So 10 plus 20 will be added, then the result will be stored into the variable name called sum. This loop is going to execute until the condition is 4 less than 5. We are going to collect 5 value. Every value will be added, and that value will be stored here into the variable name called sum. If you wanted to print the sum outside here, cout sum is, let's say, will come from the sum variable. If you wanted to print the average, it's a simple mathematics. How do you find out the average? How do you find out the average? So here I'm going to say, what's the variable that I've created? This average will come from sum divided by average. So when I save this one, divided by 5, because we have 5 marks. So when I save this one, what is an error? Maybe I can cut this one, I put it here, and then semicolon. So I will just print the average here, like this. Let me save and run. So here I have to enter 5 marks, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. The sum is 150, the average is 30. This is simple, isn't it? So, do you want me to explain this code? Do you want me to explain this code? Yes? So, I have created a variable name called sum, average, and marks. So, here I'm going to ask the user to enter the marks. Okay? So, let's say this is my array. The size of an array is 5. So, it will have 5. The first array index is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, when the user enters the mark, that will be stored into the 0th index, let's say 10. Now, let's say the user has entered the marks for the 0th index. The mark is 10. So, now what is this mark now? 10. This is the first value. Plus, what is the sum value? Initially, I have set it to 0. 0 equals sum. Now, what is the sum value? What is the sum value? Sum value is 10. So, after this is a for loop. So, it will go back and increment the I value. I value will become 1. So, 1 less than 5. So, the second value that you are going to enter here will be stored into the first index. Now, from here it will come down. Now, again it's going to be sum plus marks of I. What was the sum value before? 10. Plus, what is the marks of I? I means here is now 1. So, in the first index the value is 20. I am going to add. Now, the sum value will become 30. In the third iteration, I value will become 2. The value will be stored here. So, when it comes down here, we are going to say sum plus marks. So, the sum value before was 30. Marks of I, the I value now is 2. I am going to get this value, that is 30. Now, the sum value will become 60. In the next iteration, the I value will become 3. So, in the third index, I am going to store the value. Now, the marks of I is 40. Previously, the sum value was 60. So, 60 plus 40, it will be 100. In the third iteration, the I value will become 4. 4 less than 5, the condition is true. It's going to store the value here, let's say 50. The sum value before was 100 plus marks of I. The I value is 4. The value that has been stored into the fourth index is 50. I'm going to add this one. This is 50. Now, when you add this one, the result will be 150. So, the sum variable will have the value as 150. If you wanted to print the sum, it's going to print the result as 150. If you wanted to find out an average, sum divided by 5, because I have collected 5 marks from the user. So, I'm going to divide by 5. The result will be, when you divide 150 by 5, the result will be 30. That's the reason why we are getting this result. These are previous ones. I hope it's making sense now. Any questions? Yes. Yes, on the code here. You mean this one, sum? No, that's not a matter. You can still put them. Yeah, it can work. It can work. Just that it's going to keep on asking you, like, please enter the mark, please enter the mark when you put them inside. So let's say, for example, if I had to put them here, as I was telling you in the beginning, like, every problem has a solution. It's not necessarily be the same. The way that you approach, the way that I approach can be different. So when you put this one inside, what is going to happen is it's going to please enter the marks 10. Again, it's going to ask please enter the mark. So when you put them outside, because it's in the loop, every time when the loop is executed, it's going to ask like please enter the marks, please enter the marks. So when I put them outside, it's just going to be asked only one time because it's not within the loop. That's the only difference. Any questions? No questions? Okay, now let me give you another task, the simple one. Here is my array, integer numbers. So let's say I'm going to have 5. So in this array, I'm going to have 5 elements. So this is my array name called numbers. The size of an array is 5. I'm sure that you can able to see I have 5 elements in it. Now you are going to write a program to find the minimum number in this array. Now we are going to write a program to find out the minimum number or even the maximum number from this array numbers. How can you do that? This is an array. This array has an element. Now we are going to identify what is the minimum element. What's the minimum number here? How can you do that? Yes. It's a task. You can start typing. Okay, let me show you the logic to find out okay, if you can do it for others, right? Let me just teach you the logics to identify the minimum element from this array. I think from there you should be able to write the code to identify the maximum element in this array. So for the same reason, let me just create a function. So integer, I'm going to call this one as min. Okay, integer, this is a function. Integer is a return type, min is the name of the function. So now my job is to identify from this numbers array which one is a minimum and which one is a maximum. So for the same reason, first I have to pass this array as an argument because I wanted to find out the minimum number from this array. So for the same reason, I'm going to pass integer numbers, the array itself, because from that array I wanted to find out the number that is small. If I wanted to find out the small number in this array, I need to know the size, isn't it so? I need to know the size. If I don't know the size, how am I going to identify whether this number is small or this number is big? So for the same reason, I'm going to create another variable integer. I'm going to name this one as a size. First, I'm passing this same array as a parameter together with a size value. Now inside, I need to write a logic. Now the thing is this. In this array, we have just only 5 elements, so we know which one is small and which one is big. What if you have an array with 100,000 of data? How are you going to know? You will never know which one is small, which one is big, right? Isn't it so? So for the same reason, I'm going to assume that the first element that will be found in this array will be the small number. It's an assumption. So from there, I'm going to consider this one as a small number. Then from there, I wanted to compare the other numbers. So for the same reason, so I'm going to say numbers 0 will be my minimum number. So what does that mean? It's my assumption. I'm simply saying among these numbers that I have, the minimum number is the one that is going to be found in the 0th index. In this case, it's 12. It's an assumption. So from here, I wanted to compare with each element in this array. So I'm taking this one as a minimum element. I'm storing them into the variable name called min. Are we together? So I wanted to find the minimum number. For the same reason, I'm just assuming that what if the first number in the array is a minimum number. So for the same reason, numbers of 0, which refers to this 12, and then I'm storing that one into the variable name called minimum. Now I have to compare this number with the other elements from this array. So for the same reason, I'm just going to write a if condition. If, now what do you want to check? I need to compare if this number is less than this, if this number is less than this, if this number is less than this, if this number is less than this. If it is less than this, we can simply say, yes, this is a minimum number. If it is not, we have to identify which number is a small number among these numbers. So for the same reason, I need to write a condition. So I'm just going to say, what do I need to write here? Because I have to compare this number with the other elements from the same array. So meaning I have to iterate through. So for the same reason, instead of writing an if condition, let me use the for loop. Integer I is equal to 0. Do you understand the reason why I was asking you a lot of questions from this loop? Because it's everywhere. If you don't know the logics of this for loop and how to work with them, then you can't be a programmer. So I is equal to not 0, because I said this 0 is already been stored into the variable name called minimum. So because I wanted to compare, I wanted to take this one as a minimum, I want to compare this one with the other elements. So instead of saying 0, I just wanted to compare them with 1, because the first element I took it as a minimum. I wanted to compare with the other elements from the array. So the next one is, I less than size. Now what's the size? In this case, the size is 5. This size is coming from this parameter size. So in this case, the size is 5. So I less than size. What is next? I plus plus. So inside, so what is the use of this for loop? This for loop is simply helping us to iterate through all the elements from this array variable. Now I'm going to say if numbers of I is less than min, then I can say min is equals to numbers of I. Or else I can simply return the variable min. So did you understand what I've done there? No? Okay. So let me do this. Let me copy this. So here this is my array. This is my array. Now in this array, I wanted to identify the small number. So I have different elements. So I wanted to identify which one is small among these numbers. So for the same reasons, I created a function name called min. I wanted to find out which one is small from the array. So what I have done, I'm actually taking the same array as a parameter together with a size. So now what I'm saying, I'm simply saying, it's my assumption. I'm just simply thinking, what if this first element is the minimum? So for the same reason, I'm saying the min variable is going to have numbers of 0. What is the value of number of 0? 12, isn't it so? So initially I'm saying this 12 is the minimum, but I'm yet to find out. So for the same reason, I have to compare this first number with the remaining elements from this particular array. So for the same reason, I have to iterate through an array. So I wanted to see what has been stored into the first index, what has been stored into the second index, third index, and the fourth index, because I have elements. So for the same reason, I'm using the for loop here. So here, this is my array. The first value is 12. The second one is -3, 42, 55. The next one is 72. So initially I said this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Initially I said this 12 is a minimum. The next thing is I have to compare this 12 with these remaining elements in the array. So for the same reason, I'm saying integer I is equals to 1. I less than size. What is the size? Size is 5. The condition is true. When the condition is true, it will come inside. If numbers of I, what is the numbers of I now? What is the I value now? What is the I value now? 1, isn't it so? What has been stored into the numbers of 1? It's -3, isn't it so? So we are trying to check -3 is less than the minimum. What is the minimum here? Initially I set the minimum as 12. So 12. So -3 less than 12. Is it true or false? Is it true or false? Is it true or false? It's true, isn't it so? Because 12 is greater than -3. So if it is true, what are we going to do? If it is true, we are going to say numbers of I is equals to minimum. In that case, what is the numbers of I? That is -3, isn't it so? -3 will become the minimum. Is it making sense? Since it's a for loop, so it will be executed repeatedly as long as the condition is true. Now, for now, minimum is 3. Again, we are going back and increasing the I value. I value was 1 before, now it has become 2. 2 less than 5, the condition is true. When the condition is true, it will come inside. Numbers of I. What is I value now? 2, isn't it so? What is the value? Do you see them in the 2? It's 42. So numbers of I is 42. This is less than, what is the min value? -3, isn't it so? -3. Is it true or false? It's false. If it is false, what is going to happen? If the condition is false, what is going to happen? This if condition is not going to be executed. Isn't it so? If condition will be executed only when the condition is true. So here 42 minus -3, condition is false. When the condition is false, it's not going to take this 42 as a minimum. Instead, it's going to return the minimum. So as a result, the minimum is still going to be -3. Are we together? If you wanted to print that minimum value, what do you need to do? Remember, this is a function. This is a function. You need to call that function. So here, you're going to make a function called min. Now what are you going to pass them here? It's expecting two parameters. One is numbers, another one is a size. Yes, size we can say 5. That's the size. So what about the first parameter? What about the first parameter? What about the first parameter? The name of the variable, isn't it so? When I save this one, I think let me just say C out. So when I save this one, let me run. There is an error. What's the error? Did I miss something? There is a semicolon missing. So let me save and run. There is another semicolon missing there. Let me save and run. -3. Now you are going to write a logic to find out the maximum number from that array. You're just going to change the conditions. What are you going to do? Instead of minimum, you're just going to say greater. Isn't it so? That's the only thing that you're going to do. You're going to check whether it is greater than the actual number. That's it. You're done. So now if I run this one, it's going to print the maximum number. It's not a 12. What's the number? So wait, what other things do I need to change? I think the problem here is this return statement. Remember, we are going to return the maximum value only when this for loop fails. So I have to make sure to put that return statement outside the for loop. I think that could be the reason why we are not getting the expected result. Let me check now. As you can see them there, the maximum number from this array is 72. As you can see them here. So if you put this return statement inside the for loop, it will be executed only when this if condition is true. We wanted to return that maximum value only when the if condition fails. I think that causes the problem. Even for the same example that we did before for the minimum number, make sure to put this return statement outside the for loop. I think this is about how to work with arrays. I hope now you have a better understanding. Now is the time for us to learn about multi-dimensional array in C++.